It's Tuesday the 6th of November 2018. Today we're at Shipston on Stour. My name's David Jenkins and today I'm interviewing...
My name's Peter Gibbs.
Well, thank you very much, Peter, for the interview. I really wanted to start off with your early cricket. I've seen that you played cricket at Hanley High School in North Staffordshire, and then also for Norton Cricket Club. Can you tell me how all that came about?
Well, I was at a typically state school, which didn't have a lot of resources for playing cricket, and therefore it was necessary to look to the league clubs to play on good wickets, and we had a very strong North Staffordshire league. It was typically rather like the conurbations in Lancashire and Yorkshire, very community of close, geographically close clubs, and therefore it had a very strong league structure. Norton was an attractive proposition for me because it had a tradition of employing professionals, famous professionals, and when I started to play for them, Frank Worrell, Sir Frank, was there, and that was a great attraction to me, and it was obviously a great thrill that in my first year I was selected to play in a holiday ravaged first team. So I appeared at the age of just 15, opening the batting with the Black Prince coming in at number 3. I wish I could say that I've got a good story to tell you on that, but I didn't actually bat with him because I was on my way back to the pavilion, and it's safe to assume I didn't have a word with him to say how much the ball was swinging or otherwise. But you know, that was a great experience, and then I went on in subsequent years to play with Jim Laker and Gary Sobers. So there were 3 world great players before I was out of my teens. I'd shared a dressing room with them, and I still regard that as one of the greatest privileges that I've had.
And as a youngster coming into that sort of cricket, did those great names that you mentioned give you encouragement or support as somebody coming into the team, or were they just sort of separate from all of
that? They were encouraging, but basically I think it was a case of man up with them. You know, they expected you to look after yourself, and so to that extent it wasn't a hand on my shoulder and a come along, you know, it'll be a better week next week or anything like that. You were expected really to be, if you were going to play men's cricket, you were expected to play like a man.
And of course you would also then have played against some well-known professionals in that league.
Yes, I played against Ramadin and Wes Hall and Cliff Gladwin, who was pro for Longton, and I played against him, obviously after he'd retired from Derbyshire. So that was again a great tutelage that I had. The upside of that was that when I went on to university, when I went on to Oxford, I was the only state school boy in our team, and people might have thought, you know, that there was an inferiority involved in that, but I never felt that because I'd had this great experience with those players and with the leagues, that I never felt any sense of inferiority when I went up there.
And just stay for a moment with the big names, because obviously Gladwin would have retired from his first class cricket, but when Gary Sobers and Wes Hall were playing North Staffordshire cricket, they were absolutely in their pomp. And you know, did they go flat out as far as you can recall?
Well, they were typically professional. The amusing thing about Gary was that when we could, we put the opposition in, and he would probably decide on that rather than the captain, and then he would come back with a return of say 6 for 30. The opposition would have, you know, got about 130 runs. He would come into the dressing room, he'd take his shoes off, and he would say, right, the first 3 in the order, knock them off, because I don't want to appear again. Mm. And he would open a bottle and get started. So in that respect, he was very much the professional. The collection bucket would have gone round the ground before, of course, this was known to the general public. And it was a great training for us in the upper order, because of course people had come to see Sobers bowl, but they also wanted to see him bat, and to see us nudging and pushing our way towards the total was you know, frustrating for them. So we got quite a lot of barracking, which was very character building. Again, it was natural and logical that would happen, but Gary had certainly set us up to say, knock them off.
And then, having been successful in the Northern First Team, again at a fairly young age, you moved into minor counties cricket with Staffordshire under Jack Aiken.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Jack was a great mentor of young players. I mean, there was a certain necessity about bringing on young players in minor counties cricket, because it involved picking people, picking amateurs who would otherwise be involved in work. They had to take time off, and therefore there was a great benefit in being able to say, well, I'll just phone the headmaster up and get the pupil off for a couple of days. It was sort of indicative of the attitude of my school, that when I was selected at the age of 16, which was the same age as David Steele and Bob Taylor before me had been picked, the headmaster looked at the notice in the assembly and couldn't believe that one of the pupils had been selected to play for Staffordshire, not the boys' side, but the men's minor counties side. And he was quite beside himself on this morning, but it came as a complete surprise to him. Jack, as I said, was a great mentor and brought people on, and he was a lovely man, and a very, very good player, because of course he'd played in some wonderful sides, with, the time of Hutton and Washbrook, and he'd managed to get some games.
And then there's that wonderful piece that you wrote in Wisden a few years ago about needing to look after Sydney Barnes on one of your minor counties matches.
Yes, I hadn't really realised what sort of a story that was. But I went down to one of the test matches at Lord's, and we were talking to members on the green at the back. And I said, oh yes, well, I bet Sydney Barnes. And you could tell that they sort of stepped back and said, this is not possible that he would have known Sydney Barnes. But at the time, Sydney was, what was he, 91? And I was 18. So it's quite possible for me to have done that. And they obviously thought I was a great imposter. And I realised then that I'd obviously, again, taken part in a very unusual meeting. Of course, it ended in a sort of tragic comedy for me, because he came for the day on an incredibly rain-affected wicket, and I managed to bag a pair on the day against one of the greats.
And was he really as stern and austere as people make out?
Well, I mean, I had him for the day, and I would have said yes. Yes, he was fairly austere. But I do think that when he was playing for Staffordshire, as the article in Wisden made clear, he was one of the original professionals. He was an original sort of person who valued his contribution and valued it in money terms. And people didn't like it. the amateurs who ran the game, that was something they hadn't experienced before, I think. So in that sense, he was written up as somebody who was very, very difficult to deal with.
But he always remained true to Staffordshire, and I got the impression that he did carry on watching Staffordshire quite a lot into his later years.
Yes, I mean he played such a long time for Staffordshire because he did find that playing there and being the king of the castle in minor counties cricket was more amenable to him than struggling probably with amateur captains who he couldn't stand, because presumably he captained Staffordshire in effect, even though he wasn't called the captain. Yes. So that but the fact that he followed the game, I think, was as much due to the fact that somebody like John Aikin would say, look, the team bus goes by his front door to pick Sydney up, was something that he enjoyed. He enjoyed the fact that he was still a star.
Yeah. Let's take it on from there then. You then moved to Oxford University and played cricket there. That must have been a quite a significant change to go from league cricket, minor counties cricket, to then first class 3-day game.
Yes, it was, but obviously because I'd played 2-day minor counties cricket, because I'd played with some really, really top class players, it didn't feel it at the time, and we had to be at a good level, because county teams brought really quite strong teams to play against us. This was not only because they quite fancied enhancing their statistics against less accomplished cricketers. The important thing was that for many counties they paid match money, and therefore if they didn't play against Oxford and Cambridge, they lost that match money, and that was quite a potent reason why in my second game I played against the Yorkshire Championship side, and that included Close, Truman, Illingworth. The whole caboodle came down to Oxford, and it was a tremendous experience.
And how did you, so to speak, as a player, as a batsman, settle into that level of cricket?
Well, I was a very, as people would remember who saw me play, I was a very cautious player. I was quite a defensive player, played as straight as I could do, and was more comfortable against seam than I was against anything else. And the wickets, of course, were better than I'd played on. So the only problem was that those wickets were uncovered, so that in our very fickle climate, you could come, up against some very, very interesting and difficult wickets to play on. But again, that very much went back to my league experience, whereas the public school boys who I was playing with had played on very manicured wickets, probably well covered at a time, and they probably, if the rain came down, they probably didn't play, or they kept the covers on, or whatever. So I had a great advantage in the sense that I'd played on some really difficult tracks.
And you touched earlier on the fact that you were the only state-educated member of the team. So, did it feel like being an interloper in that style of cricket?
Well, no, for the reasons that I've said. I'm sort of, as I look back, I'm surprised that I felt reasonably at home. But I did, and I was very fortunate to do that.
And university cricket in those days, it wasn't a pushover. You won matches, didn't you, during the period of time?
Yes, I sort of regarded the opposition as quite honest in the teams they put out and in the effort they made. Yes, they did play a more relaxed style of cricket, I thought, but we were just on the cusp of that great era of the Dexters and Mays and Cowdreys, that we slightly lived on their reputations at that stage, so that the Gentlemen and Players fixture had stopped in 1962, and that was really a watershed, when after that players were regarded as just that, players. They weren't gentlemen, they weren't, categorised as professionals. You know the great story about Freddie Titmuss at Lord's, when the scorecard had been produced, and an apology was made sometime through the afternoon to say that there'd been a mistake on the scorecard, and instead of Titmuss FJ, was it? It should have read FJ Titmuss, because I think I've got that the wrong way round.
The wrong way round. Yeah.
I've got that the wrong way round. Always the amateur had his initials in front of his name, and they'd happened to have printed it wrong on that day, which was typical. So, going back to the strength of those sides. Of course, the odd thing about playing at university was how on earth did our tutors give us the time to do it? Because for 3 years I played 2-3 day matches a week in the parks, and had to get some work done from sort of 7 o'clock in the morning until I set sail for the parks, and then had to sort of fit tutorials in between. Of course the tutors were quite sort of tolerant, but there was one famous morning when I had to face up to a very eminent philosophy tutor at 9 o'clock, and faced up to Fred Truman of Yorkshire in England at 11.
Wonderful. And you were successful with both of them, I trust?
Probably more with Fred than in this instance than my philosophy tutor, but it was quite a squeeze, and it was really necessary in the winter that I had to really dig in academically.
And in many ways that's remarkable, because you referred to the Mays and Cowdreys and so on, and I think what I've read, they went to Oxford, Cambridge on the back of their cricket, and that's what they did there, and gaining a degree was of less significance, whereas you obviously came out with a degree and significant amount of first-class cricket.
Yes. They were older. I mean, to what extent they were allowed to get in there without necessarily the academic qualifications, I would think they would still have to meet the minimum requirements. I know that when of course, cricket, being a cricketer, and I'd played for England schoolboys for 2 years by the time I went for an interview and the entrance examinations, so they knew that I was a likely candidate to play cricket there, and that was important in the application. But I still had to get Latin O-level from a standing start in 6 months. So I was put through the ringer in that respect, and I had to meet the minimum requirements.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Peter, for sharing all those memories.